Let's talk about cells. There's trillions of cells in our body. First thing to keep in mind is our body is upwards of 60 to 65% of water. That is to say, the majority of our body is composed of water. And that's no different when we look at cells. There's water within cells and there's water outside of cells. The fluid or water inside of cells is known as cytosol, otherwise known as intracellular fluid. The fluid outside of cells is extracellular fluid. If we're going to break the fluid down in the body, intracellular fluid makes up 2/3. That is to say, 66% of all the fluid in our body is contained within cells, whereas the other 1/3 is outside of cells. If fluid is not within cells, it's known as extracellular fluid, which contains interstitial fluid, blood plasma, serous fluid, pleural fluid, pericardial fluid, the aqueous and vitreous humor of the eye, and the list goes on. So if there is a fluid and you're trying to determine is it extracellular fluid or intracellular fluid, first determine if it's sequestered within inside of cells. If so, it's intracellular fluid. If not, it's extracellular fluid. Let's take a look at the different things within the cell. There are a number of structures or machinery, if you will, within the cell that have specific functions, and these are known as organelles. What we see right here is an organelle known as the nucleus. It houses the genetic material, otherwise known as DNA, that is bound to a number of structures within the cell known as chromosomes. I don't have chromosomes drawn in this nucleus, but please know that humans are characterized by having 23 pairs of chromosomes. Once again, DNA is the hereditary information within our nuclei. Most cells, not all cells, but most cells in our body have nuclei with the same genetic material that is the blueprint for building and maintaining our body. There is also genetic material found within a structure known as the mitochondria, which we see right here, but the overwhelming majority of DNA in our body is confined to the nuclei of our cells. Here we have a mitochondria, and the purpose of mitochondria is to make energy, specifically chemical energy, in the form of ATP. ATP is significantly important in our body. Around the perimeter of the cell is known as the cell membrane. It's also known as a phospholipid bilayer because of the way it's composed of phosphate ions and lipid molecules. It is what's known as a semi-permeable membrane because, as we see it here, it only lets some things in or out and not others. The only way things which are non-permeable across this membrane that can get in is if we have what are known as protein channels. Channels allow ions, molecules into or out of the cell, specifically those that are not easily permeable across the plasma membrane. Here we have a surface modification known as cilia, and cilia function to move things, specifically not the cell, but specifically substances. For example, we have cilia that line our windpipe, known as the trachea, and those cilia have a sweeping motion to sweep mucus superiorly out of our windpipe or out of our trachea. The whole idea there is that the mucus serves a purpose to trap pathogens, dust, particles, and then the cilia sweep that mucus superiorly out of our trachea. So cilia function to move substances. I want to be clear on this. It's not moving the cell, it's moving substances away from cells in a specific direction. We have another cell surface modification that looks similar to cilia, known as microvilli. Microvilli are not motile. That is to say, they are not moving substances. Microvilli increase the surface area of cells. The more surface area a cell has, the more metabolically active it can be, the more things can move in and out of the cell. We also have another cell surface modification that we see in spermatozoa or sperm cells, known as flagella, or flagellum for singular. So cilia, microvilli, and flagella are cell surface modifications. What else do we have in cells? We have a number of apparatus that are involved in producing proteins. Those would include the rough endoplasmic reticulum, the ribosomes, Golgi apparatus, all involved in synthesizing or producing proteins. We also have a smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which synthesizes and stores steroids, lipids, and also calcium in certain situations. We will talk about cells in more detail when we get to histology.